fixed. The gentleman who's been doing it for me for the last 20 years and prior to that can no longer do it because the insurance to work on commercial boilers has gone up. I can bring the word insurance into this conversation from about 30 different angles. I have long felt that councils should be looking at speaking with the ombudsman, speaking with why is insurance getting out of control? And I know I'm leaving the conversation slightly, but it's a major player in the driver of the cost of housing. When I say I can bring it in 20 times, if all those insurances are rising, well, builders have to have insurance as well. So their costs for building is going to go up. So the cost of supplies, don't tell me that Home Hardware doesn't pay increased insurance this year. At what point does council step in? And I know a resolution from a small town of 7,500 means diddly to an industry the size of the insurance industry, but I feel that part of the driver behind this entire problem right now is insurance, because when I interview people, tenants proposing to move in, they're always shocked that they have to carry tenant insurance. I don't even have a choice in that anymore, because if I want to maintain my insurance, I have to prove that my tenants have their own insurance. And it gets to a point where, you know, if I look at my house built in 1888, it still hasn't burnt down yet. It's been paid for how many times? 8, 10, 12 times over those years. You know, at what point does insurance, with life insurance, we have an actuary. We can work it out. We can see it. Those actuaries aren't necessarily in place for, say, housing, for, you know. Sorry, I don't know if this is even a new.
Through your worship, here's what's within scope. There are cost drivers. There are cost drivers that drive rates. I grew up with my parents being landlords. I worked as with my former role with social housing, with the developments that we had, knowing full well the challenges of being a landlord. And I fully understand and agree that insurance is one of many cost drivers, really. But so as you were speaking, the first thing that came to my mind is making sure that tenants do carry insurance. It's not a high cost, even for people who are on fixed incomes can actually often get additional funds for as a shelter cost for tenant-based insurance. As far as landlord goes, I don't think it's somewhere where this council wouldn't necessarily get directly involved, but it's one of those knowledge pieces of saying, what are the cost drivers? As a landlord, what I would share is that there are providers out there, for example, Housing Services Corporation, who, if you are participating in certain programs, or if you're doing certain kinds of renovations, you may be able to acquire other forms of insurance that are there. But that to me is something that's really important for the landlord community to look at. But what I don't want to miss is the cost drivers. And one of the biggest cost drivers right now, you're talking about your units that have been in stock by the sound of it for a while. There are people who were buying units recently on speculation as an investment tool. As a matter of fact, in Ontario, more than 50% of condo sales go to rental units. Most of that is done on speculation that the value of the condominium will go up. But in recent years, it wasn't just based on the capital appreciation of the condo. It started becoming more and more involved in, well, hey, the rents, we can get it on the operating side and the capital side. But what happened with some of those units is because they were purchased on speculation that the capital value would go up, and right now the capital value has subsided a little bit. Maybe they purchased 5 years ago, and their mortgage is up for renewal, and the mortgage is now double what it was. And this speculation that they purchased on needs to take into account that they also have a home and a mortgage. So what you have now is you have a growing number, and I don't think we've seen this one yet. We've got a growing number of landlords who are not in the level of stability that you're talking about. We have a growing number of landlords across Ontario who are in a very destabilized circumstances. And they're thinking that over the course of the last couple of years, there was a moratorium on rental increases. And for those that have units that were built after November 15th of 2018, can change the rents to whatever we want. We haven't seen some of the destabilizing effects that are still to come in our marketplace right now. So I think what we need to do, and to me, and I'm through the chair, I'm sorry if this doesn't provide the answer that you're looking for. It's just being aware of what are the drivers, what's going on right now in the universe. To give you an example of how I would address one of the drivers, and by the way, I went back and forth with AMO about this last night and this morning, is people still haven't seen their municipal property assessments coming in. And when those come back and they see what's going on, and they're thinking, I'm going to have to make some adjustments. If you have affordability that is locked in because of a government program, the Assessment Act should mitigate how your impact assessment will work if you have a multi-residential apartment building. Sorry if I don't know if everyone's following along. If you have a multi-residential apartment building, the assessment is done by saying, within an area of this building, what are the values and rents of other buildings? But what if your building's rent is controlled by a government program? And hey, it was a really good government program. Guess what? It means nothing. So here's the province telling the municipalities exactly what they need to do differently. And the province hasn't changed the Assessment Act, and no one wants to say anything, especially MPAC, who gets their driving orders from the Treasury Board. We have to think less linearly and have that kind of knowledge of saying, where do we need to be able to push back? How do we push back differently? Because we want to make sure that Susie's rent doesn't go up. Sorry, there's only two people on, Susie and I think there's Sally here. We want to make sure that that rent doesn't go up for reasons that could be controlled by government programs. There's complexity to this. The reason why you have a long report, and by the way, call me. I want you to understand this at a depth that allows you to be able to speak to the community and speak to your staff about the importance of why they may come forward in the near future saying, we need you to send this letter through AMO with regard to impact. And by the way, that doesn't challenge the tax base because those units are already in government controlled rentals.
Thank you. I believe the CMHC 5% thing is still for first-time home buyers is still in place, which of course is basically should be renamed set up for failure, because with the cost of houses and whatnot, anyone who takes 5% going in knows that they're going to be paying a ridiculous amount when it comes to their mortgage. Can we be advocating for CMHC to create a new program that is more sustainable for young homeowners? And I am looking at advocacy. That's where I'm coming from. Because, well, as you know, 5% just isn't going to cut it. 20% barely cuts it nowadays to put a down payment on a house.
Yeah, for sure. Through your worship, I would say that there's going to be more important things to advocate on collectively. I don't dispute the advocacy there, but what I can tell you is that there was a lot of people advocating for CMHC to reduce their stress tests a year ago. And if CMHC would have reduced their stress testing a year ago, there would have been a lot of people losing their houses right now. So there's a lot that goes into the stress test. And from my previous management of home ownership programs, it wasn't the 5% or it wasn't those base figures to gain entry. It's that there was nothing in the market at that rate, except things that would need a lot of repair or had very high condominium costs. And the stress test of the individuals that were looking at them, if they had student loans or other debts, you couldn't have a car payment and a student loan and think about a house. So the reality is that I think that level of the CMHC program sort of takes care of itself. The 5% I think gets lost sometimes, or the stress test. It's a fairly involved process. My interest is really more of advocating to CMHC programs that work with the development community, that bring them in and don't rely on municipal funding, but rely on the kind of municipal programs that I'm advocating for, to show that you are actively engaged in wanting to bring affordability to your community.
Okay, Councilor Brigham?
Thank you, through your worship. Just an update. I'm a realtor on the market. So high end sometimes are getting, offers, just one offer on properties because the affordability triangle, there's less people that can afford that. In the bottom end, the 300s to 4s are, I've had 2 offers in the last month, which were competitive offers, 4 on one, 3 on the other homes. And these people are the lucky people that have that 5% down, that qualify with the stress test for the bank. They're able to do it. So good for them because they're going to diligently work away and try to get that house, which will be over asking price because there's still multiple offers in that range, which is the hardest range for people that need housing, right? It's within that range. So anyway, the question then for what we're looking for, if we do manage to, get a developer that would like to help with that affordability piece, I want to call it, because the definition is still hard for me, affordability piece. How do those people that it's a private entity, how do they decide who gets those rental units? Are the right people to get it? So it's a lower market rent, but is there some sort of qualification or how does that happen?
Through your worship, there's language that you can build into an agreement that requires that very simple income tests are done, and they're only done at the point of accessing the unit. There's also ways that you could be using. Your service manager would have great interest in this as well. So there's tools that could be used very, very easily to make sure that the lining up. And by the way, I would make sure that that is the case on units that are in any way subsidized. So I'm not saying. So again, that definition of attainable housing, the reason why that definition is important is because it's not just the affordability piece, but you were clear in saying when we are investing in helping to make something affordable, how do we know that that allocation is the right, it's being allocated to the right individual? You build that into one of the clauses in your agreement. I just wrote an agreement for another municipality that has that.
Okay, further questions from council? Okay, Grant, where do we go from here, actually? Or is there something? Yeah, go ahead. Oh.
Your worship, before we leave this, there are some next steps in the plan that we'll see some reports coming forward in the course of the next couple of months. Those reports are I've provided some draft policy work that we're going to flesh out. But I just wanted to again acknowledge the work that staff has done. We've had a number of meetings, and I know it's difficult to bring a group of staff together and be able to really heads down work on something for a period of time. Jason, Morgan, the folks that Jeff, Jed, Andre, Grant, Mark, of course, and Brent and Dave have been great to work with. The intent is that a lot of what you heard today is still being fleshed out. I still want meetings with CMHC to double check your local numbers. Your local numbers are really hard to understand because you don't have a large rental universe. And when you don't have a large rental universe, I'm relying a bit on Stratford and London, sort of blending them together. And what I can see anecdotally, I want to do some stress testing on that. What we most need is we need to bring forward 2 or 3 key policies that will be coming forward over the course of the next few months, and then have a land conversation, hopefully by, I would say, prior to third quarter. So I just wanted to acknowledge staff and the work that's being done.
If I can, just question Councillor Elwood. Yeah.
So I understand there's a lot of, thanks, Your Worship, sorry. I understand there's a lot of unknowns with all of this going forward, but I do respect the long game and what you're trying to do here. I guess my question is, when people ask me going forward? Can, like, hypothetically, could I give them 2024 or 2025, like when I'm actually seeing units? Because that's what they're gonna be wondering about. Like, not guarantees, but just an idea.
Through your worship, it's an excellent question because it's the question that everyone wants answered. What is going to happen? And I think the starting point to that question is, who does development? The municipality doesn't do development, nor do I suggest, I mean, there's a whole path that's much longer. You don't need to be going there. You've got people, your work is in attracting development. I think there's also communication. So Mayor mentioned a minute ago, what are we doing with communications? I think there needs to be a sheet, and it's one of the areas that I think would be very helpful for you to have specifically. What are the key questions that you need to be able to answer when people come and talk? I don't know if I would answer that question right now very well, because the reality is that we are working hard to attract not just builders to our community, but builders building for our community. And there's a big difference, because attracting someone to build in your community, I mean, you're talking about the home sales, and that's a unique environment. And the reason why it's unique, because you said families. Most people wouldn't have picked up on that, because in most cities, it would have been number companies. You're attracting people, the same areas you're trying to get rates low. Ask them, what do you think? Because I'm always interested in knowing where people are. One of the biggest messages that I would be sharing right now is I would be telling tenants who have secure housing to stay put as best they can, and do not accept from anyone a cash for keys. If you know what I mean by cash for keys, it's when you're offered the opportunity to exit a lease. Because what we're seeing happening across Ontario is people are exiting leases and then can't find anything. Doesn't matter if I give you $10,000, there's nothing there. So I want to make sure, Councillor, that you have answers to questions. They may not necessarily be the best answers. It may be questions that you can ask back, but I think that's part of the communication strategy. So I would take that as an instruction if you wanted to, as part of what we're working on.
Councillor Pridham? Yeah.
Thank you, through your worship. Just a question about our land bodies and who we would solicit to come in and use those lands. What about the Habitat for Humanity? What about the supportive housing, that sort of thing? Is that something that is also, when you're looking for people, is that part of that piece, or is that just set to the side and we're looking for developers?
Thank you for that. When I say developers, I mean providers and developers. By providers, developers can be nonprofit as well. There's a lot of very good nonprofit developers. I'm cautious around saying nonprofit housing providers, because there's a lot of nonprofit housing providers who are not ready to engage in development. And there are some nonprofit housing providers that are awesome at development. To be able to engage with them the way I would like to engage, I want to make sure that you've got your procurement policies set up for strategic partnerships. And anytime that you're leveraging land, one of the easiest attributes, going back to what your question was earlier, is you put an attribute that would be measured and saying, who is going to put something on this property for the longest, most sustainable, most integrated? Your scoring mechanism would cover exactly what you just said.
Okay, any further? Councillor Craigmile?
Thank you, Rachel. So Steve, if I can just follow up on Councillor Pridham there. I guess when I asked my question earlier about how long, I maybe should have. I believe right now that we do have some, what do you call it, surplus land, but the town does have some land. But I don't think, to my knowledge, any of them are big enough to maybe for 60 units, but some of them are probably big enough for a handful. And I mean, I think these are those low-hanging fruits that we can get started on as part of that big basket rather quickly, coming to, you know, when I say at least during this current year, that maybe we could, you know, get the zoning properly, or how many units on some of these and you know, those type of decisions? Is that part of that, the next steps and what you'll be coming through in the next couple of months?
Through your worship, I'm not sure. I want to make sure that I'm not misunderstanding what might come forward in the next couple of months. I caught that. I think it's critical that whatever you do, you've got a parcel of land and it's got development potential. Whatever you do, you're doing once. So my goal is to make sure that when you do it once, you're doing it as best as possible for the longest duration. Because you can turn around a parcel really quick and may not get the value out of it. So I know that there's a time element that is absolutely critical. There's also an element of the quality and the capacity that the land might have and making sure that it's ready to do that. So you may have a parcel that right now is zoned as an R1 or it's zoned as something else, or you're going through the same process as development would go through, and that's by law. And we haven't even looked at where are these and how are they going to be exercised. So I believe that there is potential. And I believe that we'll be having conversations in the very near future about that potential. And I think as we get into those conversations, you'll see that they're not simple, but they're not. I see these things advancing in the course of the next, and as I said, I'm hoping by the third quarter of this year that you're having a detailed conversation on this related to decisions. It won't be a building built in 2023. Okay.
Is relatively small in size.
Okay, anything else from council? Councilor Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to, I get the sense of urgency from council. And I do think it is an urgent issue, and it's one that previous councils have addressed well. I think we have to be very cautious of a knee-jerk reaction with, like we say, developing something so we can get 6 units when if we would have waited a year, we could have got 20 units out of. So I think we really have to be cautious about how we tread into that. And again, I like the idea of putting things into place. So over the next 5-10 years, we need to play the long game. We can't play the short game because it doesn't work. And I guess, so that would be addressing that. My other thought is, will part of this be, and maybe it's getting a little bit too into the weeds, but will there be certain as of right zoning changes to zoning bylaws that we would look at as part of this plan so that, you know, the R1 definition has a certain specific lot size, let's say? Are we looking at adjusting those things so that as developers that come in that need to look at zoning say, well, you know what, we'd love to do here, but we've got to go through zoning bylaw amendments. Some of your zoning sizes are antiquated. Is that part of what we're looking at with your scope, or is that something you would enable us to do as a municipality?
So I think the quick answer through your worship, Councilor Lucas, I think the quick answer in that is no. Just because of, and the reason for that is because of everything that we deal with on the development side is very specific on what they want to do and what they're trying to either develop on that site. Even though there's a lot of talk about pre-development lands, we still see that developers coming in knocking on the door today is they don't like the zoning that's on there and they want to put their own zoning on it. So I think we would be spinning their tires on some of that until we can further understand. Notwithstanding, do we need to take a look at it? So notwithstanding, do we need to take a look at our zoning bylaw holistically and what that looks like? Yes, we do. Is that a project that we see probably in 2024, 2025? Yes, 100%. We would probably take a look at the zoning bylaw once the OP is passed. We'll transition to that zoning bylaw piece to make sure that our lot size and everything are kind of consistent with that.
Mr. Stone, did you want to add something, Mark?
I think Grant covered it. I think there are two parts. It's the broader work that will be needed when the OP comes into effect, because we will take a look. We do have to update the zoning bylaw. And one of those things with Steve and Grant's advice is to change zoning provisions so it makes it a little bit easier where appropriate for that type of development to happen. But I know Steve can speak to this if needed, but what municipalities often do is if they have a property identified as surplus, Sometimes municipalities may take that property partway down the road when it comes to permissions. Sometimes servicing is extended to a property. I don't think that's applicable in St. Mary's, but sometimes in part to firm up what the municipality's vision is for a property, they may pre-zone the property. Or just to make it easier for that development to come on stream. So there are a number of options that I'm sure Steve's going to be presenting to us over the next few months. And pre-zoning could be an option. It may be appropriate on one property and not on another.
Councilor Brennan? Yeah.
Another question. Thank you. So we have a development on James Street North. It's apartment building. It's already approved. It's there in place. Is there any influence at this point that we could have on that development? We have nothing in place for that, I suppose, but they went from 4 stories to 5. I think they were asking for 6. We ended with 5, I think. And at that time, I mean, that would have been one of those negotiating tools that you're talking about. But right now, we don't have that with that person. So I'm just wondering if there's any way we can go back.
Through your worship, Council Prim, there might be. I know we've spoken that we speak with that developer on a regular basis. What my plan is with that, or with all developers, show them the tools that are in the toolbox outside the municipality, such as what CMHC has to offer and stuff like that, because he may be able to leverage some of that and yet be able to get some of those items. Sorry. I just have one more thing to add, your worship, and kind of like we're talking a lot about 2024, 2025, and take a look at that. But let's pull it back on how we do business today. So after one of our first meetings with Steve, and Steve got us drinking the Kool-Aid fairly quickly, and how we deal with development today, which is very different how we dealt with development yesterday. Because now when the conversation comes in, when that developer comes to the table, knocks on the door, is either pre-consult or what we call a pre-consult, because we have tire kickers, people sniffing around. Our option is, our first thing out of our mouth today is, where's it attainable? Where's it affordable? What type of development is this? And they're going, well, we're not thinking about it. Well, our next comment after that is you need to really think about that, because that's one of council's higher priorities. So when you take a look, when you talk a lot about 2024, 2025, we're pushing developers to start making those decisions today. We expect that we're probably see some low-hanging fruit as we're starting to see more developments come on stream. Again, so their comment says, okay, I can give you 2 affordable units, but what's in it for me as a developer? What do you need? You need required side yard setbacks. You want to move that bit. You want to move that building to the front. Kind of help them with their ultimate plan. Before it was, hey, let's put it on the application, let's bring it forward to council, but that conversation has now changed at the end of the day, because the conversation today is what's in it for the municipality as far as attainable, affordable, that housing piece. And now we're starting to put the developers to think about that front and foremost, because the comment that we used to get, and council used to hear it, well, there is no affordable, there's no attainable, there is nothing. And we're starting to bring that front and foremost of what that developer is, because the conversation is the zoning's in place on the lot. You're more than happy to move ahead with that development what's on that lot. If you want to see some changes, we want to see that affordable, attainable piece of what that is. And that's what and what Steve was talking about prior is, hey, it helps us to help with the tools in the toolbox, is that as long as we know we got council's backing to make those decisions, it makes things a lot easier that we have those, that we can work within that mindset moving forward as far as development happens. And it's from all aspects of development, either industrial, commercial, and on the residential side, on how we're starting to. Staff is already started those conversations in place with what's going on. So that's what's happening today.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Linda.
Thank you, Worship. I've just got so many things bouncing in my head right now, but I don't think that time is our friend right now. I think we have so many industries and commercial entities and healthcare facilities in town that are on the brink of, I'll say collapsing because of the lack of human resources. And I think housing obviously is a huge part of that. So when you talk about drinking the Kool-Aid, I hope we've got a big punch bowl that you're drinking from, because I think we need to drink it really quickly. And I agree with the comment that we shouldn't jump the gun and build something today, which if we had waited, you know, a little bit, we could have done better. We need to do our best that we can. But like you said, Grant, we need to be ready. We need to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And I don't want to see this put on a shelf for 6 months and, oh, we'll get to that in the fall because we've got all these other things to do. This, to me, has to be a huge priority right now. And we just need to keep moving forward. And I know 2023 is off the table, but I really hope 2024, early 2025 is, at least before the end of this council term, we can see something that, I mean, we've got land, do what we have to with the land to get it ready. Make that magical developer walk through the door who's empathetic to what we're trying to do, and you know, let's get going on it.
Okay, anything further from council? Councilor Craigmile?
Thank you, Worship. Stephen, I had one other question. I remember reading in the report somewhere, and I found it quite interesting because very different than some of the data I'd heard before. And it was talking about what we really needed, 1 bedroom versus 2 bedroom versus 3 bedroom. And I thought that was quite interesting. And I just wondered if you could explain on that 1 bedroom aspect.
Through your worship, you need all forms, no question. It's a matter of priority. When you talk about the population of St. Mary's right now, and you look at residents per dwelling unit, you're looking at a population distribution of about 1.4, I think, people per housing unit in St. Mary's right now, population to dwellings. The reason why that tends to be a lower number is because you have a higher population of seniors and you have a higher population of young people. You also want to attract young people, and you want to attract new people into your economy. When you're talking about those key populations, they generally rely mostly on 1-bedroom units. The other thing about a 1-bedroom unit is that a 3-bedroom unit would add a 3-bedroom unit to the mix. You could usually do 2 1-bedroom units for about the same as a 3-bedroom unit. It's not quite that mathematically sound, but you can generally get more because although you get into the fixtures and such, but the reality is that it provides an opportunity to get more units faster and units that match up to your population and the population that you're trying to attract. There is no question that there are people who need 3 bedrooms and 4 bedrooms. There's also a lot of houses in the community that used to provide that. So I'm never saying do this at the expense of not doing something else. I'm saying this is where you need to focus. And that focus is really important because it gives staff the ability to having that same focus when they're talking to developers.
Okay, anything further? Okay, anything else we missed, Grant? No? Okay, thank you for the presentation today. There's a lot to digest there, and we'll look forward to an ongoing discussion and further reports to come from council. Timing wise, Grant, when's the next steps for this?
To your worship, we would expect you'd have something probably within the next 3 months, between now and 3 months, regarding with the policies, probably more on the policy side. But like Steve mentioned, staff's already working on the land piece, on that land component, just identify some of that. Again, that'll probably be another meeting that will most likely in camera, but those are some of the works that's going on behind the scenes. So.
Okay, and thank you again for your presentation today, Mr. Justicia. Justicia, yeah, again. So the justice in Italian, right? So the suggested motion then, if everyone's okay, is that DED 06-2023 opening doors to attainable housing report be received, and that the opening doors to attainable housing and attainable housing action plan for St. Mary's be accepted as presented. That in the event of a conflict with previous reports, town staff be directed to action targets, initiatives, and priorities as defined within the open doors and attainable housing action plan for St. Mary's. The staff be directed to take all actions available to strongly advance attainable housing action plans with builders, developers, and partners to address housing needs in St. Mary's, inclusive of all new and existing housing permit and approval processes. And the staff be directed to advance actions as identified with this plan and report back on regular intervals on progress, adjustments, and land plans, municipal policies, resources, and investments, and overall plan management. Is someone willing to move that motion? Moved by Councillor Edney. Is there a seconder? Councillor Luna. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion is carried. So under item number 5, upcoming meetings, our next council meeting will be February 28th, regular council in council chambers at 6 p.m., which leads us to item number 6, which is bylaws. The suggested motion is that bylaw 18-2023 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the February 16th, 2023 special meeting of council be read a first, second, and third time, be finally passed by council and signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. So I'm willing to move that motion. Moved by Councillor Pridham, second by Councillor Craigmile. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion is carried. And finally, I seek a motion of the special meeting council be adjourned at 10:58 a.m. Someone willing to move that motion? Moved by Councillor Edney, seconded by Councillor Luna. All those in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you for today.